You are listening to Ember Weekend, your weekend recap of all things Ember. This is episode 33. I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson, and we're here to keep you in the Ember Run Loop. We're broadcasting from HashRocket HQ. It's November 2nd, and today's episode is called Context Clues. This past Wednesday, Dan McClain released a blog post about closure actions. This is Dan McClain of Emberland fame and also a former Ember Weekender. And the post talked a lot about closure actions. And he wrote this is piggybacking off of a previous blog post he wrote on closure actions that was also very good, discussing how you can rely on bubbling in order to kind of communicate between different levels of nesting in your components. In this new blog post, he outlined some really cool examples that we're going to go into where he utilizes closure actions rather than the old bubbling semantics. And I think it turned out really good. Chase, what are some of the things that you liked about this post?
I like how he explained that you could use closure actions to basically pass in some context from the top level. Some parent has some model or something that you need in a lower level, and you can kind of attach that to an action, render a child component that knows a little more specific information about what it's rendering. It can tack that onto the action. And then the last component that you render doesn't really have to know anything other than maybe that it's doing some submit or delete or something. And it gets all the kind of surrounding context of the chain that was passed down to it. So it was really interesting. The example he gives is basically like, I think he has dogs, cats, dog, and cat. And he, when you click a button, it basically triggers an action on the parent based off the one that was clicked. And the way that this information gets down to that last button is the interesting part.
Yeah, I really enjoy the use of currying functions here. It's something that I've utilized quite a bit recently, and it's just nice. It's just nice to be able to kind of do that, and then the things that need to know the information kind of own that information. Rather than kind of relying on more implicit kind of directives on how to get your data to look right. So this currying stuff is really sweet.
Yeah, one of the other interesting things about this is that the way that the actions are attached to the click handler, it's using closure actions, but rather than the first parameter being the name of the action in the context to execute, it's actually another closure action. So you can so if you think about saying something like action and click, and then you maybe pass a parameter, in this case it was dog, that will call the click action on the parent. But what Dan does in this article, he says action, and then the first parameter is adder's click. So it's already a closure action. So the closure action he's creating is just going to call the other closure action that it's wrapping, but it will add a parameter of dog. And the main focus of this blog post is about how these closure actions don't bubble in the normal way that the click events would. So you're basically responsible for getting that data up to the parents, and these things don't end up bubbling up to controllers, and definitely not to routes. So he goes into how you would get that effect if you need it.
Yeah, which is really, really, really neat. So yeah, this is definitely a post that I recommend brushing up your closure action skills with. So if you get a chance, you should definitely check it out. So I had a little bit of open source time this past week, and I was able to put a little time into trying to get Ember Weekend working with FastBoot. And again, because we actually were able to get this running with FastBoot before Glimmer, right, Chase? I think that was somewhere around episode 11 or 9.
Yeah, I think it was right when Glimmer was just on Canary.
Right. And we had a much simpler app then, so it was a little bit easier, and we were able to just remove things that got in our way. So anything that kind of conflicted, we just took an axe to it, because this was just a kind of proof of concept to see how far we can get. And one of those things was Liquidfire. Liquidfire actually has some FastBoot support, and I think there's some work being done to try to make it work well within the context of Node. One of the things that FastBoot does is it uses Simple DOM to parse out, to use Simple DOM with HTML bars to kind of create the string output that you would expect. But Simple DOM doesn't actually implement document. So anything that relies on document, any JavaScript that you have that relies on document, needs to be guarded against. So you need to ensure that the document exists. And I was running into this with the import from Velocity. So Liquidfire has a dependency on Velocity.js, and it obviously uses a document because that's kind of what its job is. So it makes sense. And what I ended up doing was I ended up wrapping a thing around it to make it basically not look at it and just it's just a guard that says, if document's not undefined, then do your thing. Otherwise, don't. Which is really, which is fine. But I kind of wanted a way for Ember CLI itself, specifically Ember App's import method. So when you're inside of your Ember CLI build file, app.import, it would be really nice to have the ability to just set a flag there that says wrap this in a guard against, this DOM availability. So I actually started working on that, and I actually got most of the way there, but there's still some work to be done. And it's one of those things where I'm just kind of getting my dipping my toes in the water to figure out a little bit more about FastBoot. And I think there's going to be some hurdles coming up, especially with regard to testing this PR and then figuring out how to do it all. But FastBoot's really exciting, and I definitely want to put extra time into it and maybe get some eyes on it to see kind of where it can go. Because I'm very excited about the idea, especially after listening to that talk we mentioned a few weeks back about progressive enhancement by Tom Dale. Definitely excited to see FastBoot, and I'm really excited to see movement on it. So, so check it out. We actually wrote a blog post and posted it to Ember Weekend, kind of outlining what we did and pointing to the PRs. So we'll link to that, and you can check it out if you want to. So Chase and I investigated the RFC around Ember contextual components, which is now not behind a feature flag anymore on Canary. So it's like kind of ready to go, kind of shipped. I'm sure there's going to be more work done on it as people start using it and finding all of the little things and they flesh it out. But it is available, and things that you can do with Ember contextual components end up being really, really neat. We decided to kind of dive into it and try to do some preliminary research around how you can do maybe a Form 4 input kind of thing, like similar DSL to what Rails does with a Form 4. And we actually got that working, and it was surprisingly easy and really fun. This was all kind of because we saw the talk from Ember NYC by Matthew Beal outlining how to use these Ember contextual components. He also mentions the routing service and one other feature that's in development. But Ember contextual components are really cool. So what are some of the things we learned, Chase?
Well, in the beginning, we started out with a really simple example that kind of works in the kind of the old style of Ember, where you'd just do kind of two-way data binding. And to get that to work, we basically had to do this this trick with the action mutable, so that the model you passed in was two-way bound. So any of the inputs in this Form 4 we were developing would automatically change the model, and that was super simple. The amount of code we had to write was very minimal. I think we only needed one action for the very last kind of like input component in order for the update to trigger in the right time.
Yeah, and then some clever uses of the mutable helper too.
Yeah, that's the key thing. It's also probably the thing that will confuse most people.
Definitely.
Like why you actually need that, whereas you used to not. Used to just be to say value is like model.firstname, and that would be two-way bound, and why you need this kind of like, I think we ended up using on change, or no, it was that on input.
On input, yeah.
And that way you got for every single key and keystroke, you got this update event firing, which would change the model. And then after that was done, we basically did a more kind of up to spec, nice Ember way, like the way you would actually want to develop this, where the component basically gets the model, reads the initial values off, and then from there kind of is working on like a clone of the data in that model based off of whatever things were rendered. So we have this model that had three properties: an ID, a first name, and a last name. But obviously in the form, we're not trying to render every property of the model. We only want to render the ones we want the user to edit. So in this case, it was first name and last name. So when we rendered the Form 4 and the first name and last name inputs get rendered, those keys go into the parent form and create what we call the buffer object. That is a thing that's designed to store the intermediate values before the users press the submit button. And then pressing the submit button goes and reads the values one more time, and then passes those as the parameter to a submit action, so that the surrounding context that called the initial Form 4 can handle the action of, this model, these parameters you tried to update by rendering fields were changed or maybe not changed.
Yeah, and you can kind of make the decision there. So the end result, the invocation would be form for model equals model, update equals your update action, and then as form, and then form input first name. Field equals first name, and those ended up being really interesting. Like that signature looked really familiar and it felt really good. So I'm definitely excited about this. And one of the interesting things that we had to do here, in order to allow the registration of the child components to the main component, rather than passing in the entire this concept, we talked about this recently about using that block, those yielded block parameters as a kind of API. We actually hand down a register function, and that register function to the form input component, which is the child of the form for, and that was responsible for registering its field name within the buffered object, and then also giving a closure function that would allow them to retrieve the value at a later time. So when we end up calling submit, we just say, okay, we'll go and find everything on the buffered object, get each one of its keys, call the function, which would then retrieve the value, and then submit those adders to the update action that was passed in. And it ended up being really clean. Felt pretty good. The only thing was a little strange is that we had to wrap it in kind of a closure thing. That there's probably a way to use Ember bind to do that, but I don't know. We just kind of fell back onto old ECMA 5 tropes and made it work. But it ended up being really good. And there's a proof of concept JS bin that you can take a look at and begin dabbling with Ember contextual components.
So this past Thursday, we had another Emberjacks, and this time we talked about a little bit of the work that me and John were doing around kind of the Ember CLI Rails bridge. There's currently a project that does this, but it does it in a way where Rails basically controls all of the asset compilation, and we've been leaning more heavily on using something like Ember CLI deploy to let Ember CLI kind of do its own thing, and let Rails do its own thing, and then kind of increase the air gap but still allow Cucumber testing in between the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's really the key. So right now, Ember CLI Rails is the project with Sean Doyle doing a lot of really great work there at Thoughtbot, and we're seeing you load a Rails view, and from within that you require the script tags that it provides, and those script tags point to the Ember assets, the vendor.js and the Ember.js, and your Ember app.js, and that puts the app on the page, but it has some limitations. Some of the limitations revolve around asset management, but not the least of which is content from the index HTML are not on the page, so many add-ons don't work, and there's a number of other issues with some granularity of this. And once again, most of these things are being worked through, but I think the eventual push that we're trying to go for is to have a more complete separation so that the Ember app is over in wherever, it doesn't matter, and then the Rails app is wherever, it doesn't matter, but they're still able to work together and to do a full stack test. And that's something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah, and I started off doing this not with the intent of actually doing any work on Ember CLI Rails. I was just trying to get an Ember app to kind of play nicely with Rails and allow Rails to be able to serve the index file. And then it turned out that I ran into a lot of the same problems that many people have solved, and that Ember CLI Rails kind of was born to try to solve. And when with a couple of the solutions that I came up with, Sean Doyle ended up getting interested and wanted to talk and talk about bringing this into Ember CLI Rails. And I was really happy to find out that his kind of goal is to pull in more of Ember CLI deploy's kind of methodology, and he actually has written an Ember CLI Rails deploy Redis gem already that lets you do this lightning fast deploy style from within Ember CLI Rails. There is still going to be some backwards compatibility, but it's nice to know that we're kind of both headed in the same direction. So a lot of the work me and John are doing can be pulled into Ember CLI Rails.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it. I kind of can't wait to see how it ends up. I know that you've also written the asset gem that would allow backward compat for Ember CLI Rails to the Ember app to be able to reference some Rails assets. That's really interesting, and still fingerprint. That's the real thing.
Yeah.
And I think that that's going to be really interesting. So I'm really excited about the direction of this project, and I want to see it mature. I think it's going to be a really good thing.
Yeah, and we kind of in the meetup we broke this down into like all the different layers that go into like this problem, and the things that we think are the kind of the large areas are first of all routing. Just getting your Rails app to be able to serve the Ember app at all. Like, and in this case, it's by just serving the text that is the index HTML from ember-cli-rails. So with no doctoring, Rails just has to somehow be able to find that index file and pull it out and serve it to the user.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting because once that's done, then you don't have to worry about cores, which is one of the really cool parts about Ember-CLI deploy strategy, because the index HTML is served from the same domain as your backend. So you get a lot of things for free there. It's pretty cool.
And due to the kind of the collaboration of this, something was brought to my attention that I didn't even think about, which was Sean Doyle mentioned. You could take that time to inject certain things into the index HTML to kind of bootstrap the data that Ember needs for the page that it's on. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's going to be really, really cool. I'm still kind of concerned at how you're going to actually push it in to Ember data, for instance, without having to have two separate models or two adapters rather.
I think all you'd end up doing is just writing onto the page somewhere, just some JavaScript variable that's like data, and that data is just a JSON API document of all the data models you might have. Like it could have like users and posts and comments or whatever, anything, but they're all in a JSON API document. And then you could just have an initializer that goes onto the document and reads that and just does a push payload and takes all that, throws it into Ember data.
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So bootstrapping is another kind of like low hanging fruit kind of thing once the solution gets pulled in.
Yeah, and then the next kind of tier down, the next thing we're going to try and really work on is this integration with deployment, which Sean Doyle's already done the kind of Redis deploy part, which we pulled into some this route gem we worked on, and ember-cli deploy is obviously what we're using. So that layer is pretty much kind of handling itself. The next layer down is basically all the build tooling, and that's taken into that's all done in ember-cli Rails. So it just basically kind of uses any Rails commands you need to do Rails kind of serving stuff, and then has some rake tasks built in to do things like build Ember apps. Hopefully we'll add some for something like deploying Ember apps because we're using ember-cli deploy, running tests from Ember, all that kind of stuff. And then the last layer is kind of an optional layer. It's not going to be needed by everybody. Because I know Sean is thinking he's just going to use Rails and just the root is going to be an Ember app. So there's no Rails assets to load. But in my case, and I know in a lot of people's cases, they have an existing Rails app that they want to have, a portion of it in Ember, and maybe they want to share assets from this existing Rails app into the Ember app. So there's the last piece is this glue that allows the Ember app to be compiled with the asset paths of the Rails assets.
Yeah, that'll be really, really cool. I that was something that has bit me several times, because if you want to reference those assets, you kind of have to turn off fingerprinting, and then you can run into some really annoying caching problems that, basically you're going back to pre-asset pipeline days, and that's just, that's not good.
Yeah, and the solution for this was actually really interesting. Basically, I just took exactly what happens in rake assets precompile and then wrote out a asset manifest for development, so that the two apps could talk to each other, and this manifest would be written to temp, and then there's kind of an accompanying Ember add-on that knows where, that is configured to know where to look for that manifest, and then it does kind of its own asset rewrite at build time to replace the few assets that are basically like whitelisted in this file. And so in my case, I had listed it to replace anything that began with Rails/assets. So I had like Rails/assets/application CSS. It would just look for this in the manifest and then get the fingerprinted version and replace that in the final Ember build with a relative path to where to find that file.
Which I think is the same way that Broccoli Asset Rev does its job, right? You're actually tapping into Broccoli Asset Rev. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm not actually tapping into Asset Rev. It just does the exact same thing, but they both use I think it's called Broccoli Asset Rewrite under the hood.
Very cool. Very cool. So yeah, there's a lot of exciting work going into this project, especially when we start trying to pull it into ember-cli-rails. And we're definitely going to be sure to keep you in the loop. If you're a Rails person, then this is definitely something to tune into.
Thanks for listening to Ember Weekend. If you'd like to follow along, visit us at ember-weekend.com.
Or you can find us at Ember Weekend, all one word, on Twitter, or subscribe via RSS.
I'm Chase McCarthy.
And I'm Jonathan Jackson.
And we'll see you next weekend.